Sleep is an absolutely important topic in human life, meaning we spend a third of our lives in bed, so it's something we need to take good care of because we know that people with poor sleep end up having serious health issues, concentration problems, and can even develop depressive and anxious symptoms and inflammatory conditions. So, it's important to give credit to those who complain about changes in their sleep patterns and difficulties with time zone changes. I've read a lot about this. I worked in a sleep unit during my residency in creative psychiatry. In every department, people complain about something, but when it comes to time zone changes, it's always a major issue. It's related to light and energy efficiency in work, but for the human brain, it's detrimental. Indeed, we have circadian rhythms, our internal biological rhythms. As the day turns into night, we start producing melatonin, and thanks to melatonin, we induce sleep, and we can have more or less profound sleep. If you disrupt these light rhythms, it's not the same as how we sleep in summer compared to winter. In summer, there's still light at 10 p.m., so putting a child to bed at 8 p.m. is different from doing so in the dark at 6 p.m. in winter. Therefore, the natural way to induce sleep changes, and people who are greatly affected by the winter and springtime changes complain a lot because the body takes time to adapt. It's like the famous jet lag. Some people struggle with jet lag, and it can even affect their mood, leading to irritability or people who have jobs that require night shifts or changing shifts. Unfortunately, this is necessary for many professions like nursing, but it's not good for the brain, and we know it can have consequences. So, when people complain, it's not just because they like to complain. It's true that the time change makes many people take weeks to return to a normal sleep pattern, while others can sleep no matter what happens and nothing affects them. Regarding circadian rhythms and melatonin, we need to know that every person has a different age-related requirement. Babies, for example, sleep for 12 to 15 hours. Children aged 6 to 13 need to sleep between 9 and 11 hours, and adolescents experience a significant decrease, sleeping 7 to 9 hours. Adults typically sleep between 7 and 9 hours, while older adults sometimes require fewer hours of sleep. Everyone needs their own hours, and it's essential for each person to know their own needs. What you just mentioned is very important, and I think it's something we don't implement enough. Children need to sleep for 9 to 11 hours. It's indeed one of the things parents sometimes don't know, and it can lead to many issues with attention, concentration, and irritability. I see it with my own children. When they suddenly switch to a different mode, I often think, maybe you're tired. This is something that can make a huge difference. Even a short nap can refresh them in a minute. It's just that you were pushing them to a limit because their brains have much less resistance capacity in that regard. What they start doing is becoming irritable, crying, and sometimes having more tantrums, getting angrier, and feeling more tense, leading to crying. Many times, and I won't even mention Christina, who I think is crucial, especially now that many parents will be listening to this, there's a surge in attention and concentration problems among all adolescents and children. Neurology and child psychiatry clinics are overwhelmed with parents who, due to the post-pandemic situation and everything that's been happening, keep asking questions because their children have attention and concentration problems, can't memorize anything, and perform poorly in their studies. There are many causes, of course, but one of them is that during the pandemic, with the lockdown and everything we've experienced, suddenly they had no structure in their daily routines, especially in their sleep patterns. Many parents believe their children can go to bed at midnight. I see this in my practice frequently. Then they wake up at 7 a.m. Children need to sleep much more, and if they don't, it doesn't mean they will perform better in school or get better grades. So, when someone comes to ask me about an issue, the first thing I inquire about is their sleep, and if I need to recommend a sleep study, I do it. I've been surprised many times to discover that some people delay melatonin production. We all know, Christina, people who suddenly become active at night, like my father, who becomes active late at night, while I start becoming a walking zombie around 10 p.m. Some people are morning people, while others are night owls because we have different rhythms and the release of certain substances in our bodies. When you undergo a sleep study, it's very useful because you may discover that you have sleep apnea, or you experience moments when your oxygen saturation drops too low, causing harm to your body, leading to micro-awakenings. This is one of the worst causes for experiencing inflammatory disorders, mood disorders, and attention problems. We come to the conclusion that poor sleep can cause inflammation, which is also one of the most important keys. People with arthritis, inflammatory digestive problems, or chronic inflammatory diseases are affected by sleep because restorative sleep at night is when cortisol levels decrease. If you have high cortisol levels at night, you can't fall asleep. It's one of the major problems. That's why a significant percentage of the population is taking sleeping pills today. We could share some alarming statistics to emphasize the importance of how healthcare professionals should guide their patients in taking medications. I understand it's easy to take a benzodiazepine and fall asleep like a log in 3 minutes, especially with all the stress going on today. But in the long term, those pills are not harmless to the body. So, in a momentary situation, it's not a big deal. But according to someone who constantly relies on sleeping pills, sometimes you need to transition away from those pills to melatonin and natural products. This transition, when done properly with the guidance of a professional, can be helpful. That's why when many people ask me about melatonin, I tell them it's much better to take melatonin, but don't take it at 3 in the morning because that's when your melatonin peak is abnormally high. It's much better to align it with your body's natural rhythm, and this varies from person to person. Take it when you feel your body signaling it's time for sleep. People come to the store and ask what time is best to take melatonin, and I always emphasize being respectful of your body's sleep signals. However, there are times when it's challenging to listen to our bodies. We may notice that our eyes are getting heavy, and we're ready to get into bed, but suddenly we think, oh, I'll just do this one more thing. This is the dreaded screen time. You grab your iPad, start watching a series, check notifications, or make a call to someone that raises your cortisol levels for the rest of the night. That's why I always say one of the fundamental tips for sleeping well is to take care of the hour and a half before bedtime. During this hour and a half, avoid caffeine, Coca-Cola, or similar items, which are classics that some people still consume. I often see people in my practice saying, after dinner, I'll have my little coffee. They claim it doesn't affect them at all, but there are people for whom caffeine doesn't have any noticeable effect because they've built up a tolerance. However, caffeine competes for the same receptor where melatonin acts. There's a struggle between them. When you consume caffeine and then try to sleep, the caffeine occupies the receptor and blocks melatonin from having its full effect. This is why, even if you don't feel the impact as strongly as others, there's still a biochemical effect. It's similar to taking a paracetamol, acetaminophen, that doesn't seem to work for you, but it still has some biochemical impact, even if you don't perceive it as strongly as others do. So, during that hour and a half before bedtime, avoid conversations with anyone who might cause a cortisol spike. Don't call your mother-in-law, your father, your boss, or engage in stressful discussions at night. If you exercise, there are those who suddenly get motivated and go for a run or engage in strenuous physical activity. However, this can keep you alert and hyperactive. I've had many athletes in my practice who mention that after an intense game or training session late in the day, it takes them 2 or 3 hours to fall asleep because their entire body remains hyper-alert and active.